In 1962, silent film comedian Buster Keaton gave an interview in which he discussed who it is and is not funny to hit in the face with a pie. If I had a grand dame who was dogging it and putting it on, she was a gray-haired woman, but so overbearing in everything else that the audience would like to hit her, then you could hit her with a pie and they'd laugh their heads off. But if she was a legitimate old lady and a sincere character, you wouldn't dare hit her. An early, maybe the earliest example of the pie-in-the-face gag is from a 1909 film named Mr. Flip, in which an abusive general store manager receives a pie to the face after repeatedly harassing numerous women. The pie-in-the-face gag is best encapsulated by The Simpsons. In the episode Brother from Another Series, Season 8, producers of the Krusty the Clown show see the Sideshow Bob character wearing a fancy hat and suit and suggest throwing a pie at him, rather than at Bob's younger brother, who is currently in clown getup auditioning for the show. The result is uproarious laughter. The point is,
pie gag's only funny when the saps got dignity.
When the target of the pie is powerful, dignified, but flawed, that's when we most enjoy seeing them fall from dignity. A pie in the face knocked everyone down to the same level. Anyways, today I'm talking about the Lord of the Rings musical. In 2005, it was announced that a musical version of Lord of the Rings would premiere in Toronto. The premiere date was set, March 23, 2006, at the Princess of Wales Theatre. Previews would start in February of 2006. The massively successful and popular film trilogy of Lord of the Rings had just released its final film, Return of the King, in 2003. The production was originally supposed to premiere in London's West End, but apparently, when all the large enough theater venues were booked up, the producers decided to premiere it in Toronto. So, a big get for Toronto, right? A premiere before New York or London of a hugely popular franchise with fancy British producers, and a chance to boost Toronto tourism, which had not ever fully recovered from the SARS outbreak in 2003. Tourism affected by a pandemic, how topical. What could go wrong? David Mirvish of, Mirvish Productions, of course, hopped on board as a co-producer for the Toronto premiere. The government of Ontario invested $3 million into the production. Toronto Mayor David Miller made statements in support of the production and how much it was going to do for tourism. So it was very, very built up. Expectations were high. And then the show opened. It went bad. Critics did not like the show. Ticket sales were bad. It went bad. Now, a concession, I did not see this show. I did not live in Toronto in 2006. I have listened to the soundtrack and I have seen a lot of video footage from the production, and I can say I don't believe the show would have been my cup of tea. Most of my jabs at the show in this video are for comedic purposes. But this video is not about whether the show was really that bad or actually secretly good. This video is about spectacle and what happens when spectacle flops. So if you saw the Lord of the Rings musical and you liked it, I am not here to argue with you. I am genuinely happy that you had a nice time. The Lord of the Rings musical, which I keep wanting to call Lord of the Rings the Musical, even though that is not actually what it was called, attempts to cover all 3 books in the trilogy in 3.5 hours. For reference, the film of Return of the King, which covers only one of the books, was about 3.5 hours long, and all of that film had 6 endings jokes aside, it felt like it needed that time to tell its full story. And that is without it leaving room for songs. Side note, on the other end of the spectrum you have the Hobbit trilogy, in which one book shorter than any of the Lord of the Rings books is stretched over almost 8 hours. Why? But I digress. The show was broken up by 2 intermissions, and it appears each act basically covered one book. The music was written by A.R. Rahman, an Indian composer and musician, Christopher Nightingale, a British composer and orchestrator, he's since worked on the Matilda musical, and the band Vartina, a Finnish folk music band. Book and lyrics by Matthew Warkis, current AD of the Old Vic Theatre, and Sean McKenna, an English dramatist and lyricist, Warchus also directed the project. He's since directed the original production of the Matilda musical. He and Nightingale worked together a lot. It was produced by Kevin Wallace, a theater producer. He's worked a lot with Andrew Lloyd Webber and Saul Zaentz, who produced Amadeus and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So a lot of theater, music, and film pedigree here. The stage design involved a revolving stage and 17 lifts. It had automated technology for flying in and out scenic elements and for flying actors. There's a good article in the magazine Lighting and Sound that really gets into all of the stage technology and mechanics. Spectacle and technical wizardry from the first marketing was always an integral part of this show's identity. So, let's talk about spectacle. John J. McAloon, in Olympic Games and the Theory of Spectacle in Modern Societies, defines spectacles as such. Spectacles give primacy to visual, sensory, and symbolic codes. They are things to be seen. Hence, we refer to circuses as spectacles, but not orchestral performances. He also says that to be a spectacle, they must be of a certain size and grandeur. William O. Beeman, in The Anthropology of Theater and Spectacle, quotes McAloon's definition and goes on to say that the meaningfulness of a spectacle is usually proportionate to the degree to which the elements displayed to the public represent key elements in the public's cultural and emotional life. So, I'm going to try to separate out what I think are the three parts of spectacle. Size and grandeur, how big is it, how much money was spent on it, virtuosity, how difficult technically was this to do, and visual symbolism. What is this spectacle representing and why is it meaningful to the viewer? The first two somewhat explain why spectacular entertainment, particularly things like Broadway musicals and Cirque du Soleil, are so popular with tourists. Even when they don't understand all of the symbolism because of a cultural barrier, size, grandeur, and virtuosity are a bit more universal. Caveat that some cultural practices frequently performed for tourists that require years of training and skill may, when successfully performed, appear deceptively simple and not be recognized as virtuosic. Take any one of your family members who has worn a grass skirt to a barbecue and after 2 sangrias has tried to hula dance. This is not to discount the importance of symbolic meaning in spectacle. As Beeman said, it greatly increases the meaningfulness of the spectacle in question. When all three are present, size and grandeur, virtuosity, and meaningful symbolism, that's the most successful kind of spectacle. When you don't successfully imbue your spectacle with symbolic meaning, either cultural or emotional, and in the case of a mega musical, let's say if you haven't successfully made the visual symbols emotionally resonant for the audience, then you're either hoping the grandeur is enough to make up for it, or you're relying on the symbols of your spectacle being meaningful for other reasons. Other reasons like nostalgia. There's a reason so many musicals these days are based on movies. Recognizable characters, scenes, lines, motifs all carry a weight of meaning even before the audience enters the theater for this new musical. I don't think anyone making these musicals is setting out to intentionally make meaningless spectacle. I believe their goal is genuinely to create a musical that works on its own, but there's a certain safety net in knowing that if you don't successfully build meaning for your audience, hey, they've already come in with some meaning to spare. While we're here, on Broadway, let's talk about the mega musical. A mega musical is a musical that combines spectacle with profit, like the blockbuster film. They usually start out on Broadway, sometimes London's West End, play there for years, and eventually tour around the world. Cats is frequently cited as the first mega musical. Others include Wicked, Phantom of the Opera, Lion King. Lord of the Rings is even sometimes listed as an example of a mega musical, despite it being a commercial flop, probably because it was so clearly designed to be a mega musical. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. Theater is very expensive to create and slow to turn a profit, so aiming for mega musical status is not a bad business choice. I don't dislike mega musicals. I had the soundtrack to Les Mis in my Discman through all of high school. I think at their best, they combine spectacle with great music and a satisfying, usually melodramatic emotional arc. What's not to like? What does bug me about mega musicals? I could do an entire other video essay on big budget mega musicals in more recent years trying to emulate cinematic techniques and how theater will always be worse at those techniques no matter how much money it throws at a quick change, because the techniques were designed for film, and they're easier and more effective on film. But instead of making that a whole other video essay, I'm just going to take up too much time in this video essay for it, so strap in. Not to praise Cats. Because let's be clear, I absolutely do not want to praise Cats. But a lot of its mega musical spectacle over substance flavor is distinctly theatrical. It's not trying to be cinematic. There's a good reason it didn't work on film. Parts of the stage came out into the audience, members of the cast came out into the audience. That kind of immersive liveness can really only be found in theater and I guess also in haunted houses. The Cats transform the trash around them into whatever props and costumes they need. It's incredibly dance heavy. While dance films can certainly be popular, there is something virtuosic about seeing incredible dancing live. You know they have to be so good that they can do this every single night. I don't think necessarily the Lord of the Rings musical production was trying to poach from the film trilogy's design and effects. But from what I've seen of the musical through footage, a lot of which is from the London production, but some from Toronto, the special effects appear least effective when trying to emulate cinematic special effects. Let's take the moving stage, for example, with its revolving center and its many, many lifts. Impressive to behold, I'm sure. But what is this effect trying to do? It seems that it was usually used for location changes. In film, you could quickly move from one location to a drastically different one through the magic of editing. It takes the blink of an eye, one click of the editor's mouse, and we've moved from being carried through the sky by an eagle to a bedroom. And audiences are so used to this convention, they barely notice it's a convention. But on stage, in a musical like this, any move between drastically different locations that tries to represent each location too literally involves like 20 moving set pieces, backdrops being flown in and out, all in front of the audience. And even when done perfectly smoothly and quickly, the moment inherently becomes about the technology used to get there rather than the story or the character beats that necessitated a location change. It's virtuosic, and so the set change becomes a spectacle in and of itself. Video essayist Lindsay Ellis presents an interesting example of this phenomenon in reverse in her video on the film adaptation of The Phantom of the Opera.
The worst part's when they get to the Phantom's lair, which appears to be lit by a million floodlights, and these candles are literally rising out of the literal lake. This happens in the movie because that's how it happens in the show. Candles literally rising from the floor. But when you see it in the show, do you think, oh hey, literal candles literally rising from the floor? No, you're like, oh, this is like a scene transition. I've heard about those.
Film tends to literalize images, meaning this is now a literal thing that the Phantom arranged. I guess as a welcome present for Christine? This is not to say that it's bad to be inspired by other mediums, but when you poach techniques from them without really understanding why those techniques exist and why they work for that other medium, then you get nonsense. Okay, back to Lord of the Rings. The show was very, very built up. On March 16th of 2005, there is a press conference in Toronto. At this press conference, it is announced that the Lord of the Rings musical will premiere in Toronto and not in London's West End. The press release put out that day begins with, "The book trilogy has sold in excess of 200 million copies. The multi-award-winning 3-film adaptation broke box office records. Now, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings arrives on stage." It hits you with this right away. This thing has proven successful. This thing has proven award-winning. This thing can make money. We're starting very high status here. If you've never written a press release before, and if so, congratulations on the choices you've made in your life, one of the things you're trying to do is cut through all of the press releases the media contact you're sending it to receives all the time. Why should they pay attention to this show? What makes this show special? More likely to be great, more likely to be a big hit. And nothing suggests future success like past success. Here are some of the things emphasized in the media in the wake of this press conference. How big the budget for this show is, how slick the technical aspects of the show are going to be, how big the cast is going to be, how this is going to boost Toronto's theater status and its tourism. And of course, there is some mention of the artistry. There will be no singing and dancing hobbits. The music will be in a very traditional mold and will draw on ethnic traditions, Mr. Wallace said. Ethnic traditions? Ethnic traditions? What? And the pedigree of the team behind it, my goodness. If only we had a legitimate and award-winning theater actor cast. Oh, it's July 2005 and now we do. Brent Carver is announced to be playing Gandalf. Veteran of the Stratford Festival, won a Tony Award for Kiss of the Spider-Woman. They probably could have stunt cast a Hollywood celebrity, but no. They went with theater pedigree. Legit. And of course, there was a real focus on what this was going to do for Toronto tourism. A CBC article includes a brief exchange with Rod Sealing, president of the Greater Toronto Hotel Association. It's huge, and it has its own cult following, like Star Wars. It has a life of its own, he said, adding that the show would attract not only Canadian and American audiences, but theater-goers from around the world. They have to eat here, they have to shop here, they have to sleep here. They all seemed so sure that this show was going to save Ontario, mostly Toronto, tourism from the post-2003 SARS outbreak slump that it was still in, that the government invested $3 million in the production, a decision which did not receive criticism. And it was not illogical to think that this show would boost Toronto tourism. Lord of the Rings is very popular, and as every preview article states, this show was going to be massive. But from speaking to numerous theater artists living in Toronto at the time, I also learned that rumors started to emerge that technical aspects of the show weren't working, that actors were getting injured in rehearsal, and whether or not that is actually true, the rumors were there. National Geographic produced a short documentary on the London production's rehearsal process for their Inside series, and most of this documentary is spent on various actors trying to learn difficult stunts and how to work with dangerous sets and costumes without getting injured. To anyone that followed the train wreck that was the musical Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark through its rehearsal and preview period, this all may sound very familiar. Reports of injuries were leaking out of that show left and right. So for audiences, here is the potential baggage they're coming into the Lord of the Rings musical with. I love Lord of the Rings. I hear this is going to be huge. I hear this is going to save Toronto tourism. I hear an actor got injured. I hear the Balrog isn't going to work. So I'm not really going to get into the preview period of the show, but apparently the first preview was about 5 hours long and there were frequent technical malfunctions. So, the show opens. The reviews come out. Brent Brantley for the New York Times called it very expensive, largely incomprehensible. He goes on to complain about the murky visual design for the show, particularly the Twilight-esque dark lighting, saying, "Nor is it easy for the cast members to register emotions legibly amid the gloaming." The Financial Post's review is a bit more mixed to positive, and apologies I can't seem to find the author of this one. I was one of those who doubted whether it could be effectively adapted for the stage. It had, after all, taxed the resources of 3 long films. Well, there are things missing that are definitely missed, and some that are there but rushed. All the same, the adaptation is remarkably successful and clever. The reviewer goes on to say that while the show needs more work to clarify character arcs, in general it's an effective spectacle with a human element. Toronto Star. No one ever thought it would wind up being dull, yet somehow that's the most fitting word to describe what director Matthew Warchus and his colleagues have labored so long and hard to do. Forbes. What finally appears in this earnest theatrical incarnation has been severely condensed and flattened, drained of much of the spirit, emotion, and peculiarities that make the Tolkien novel so appealing to scholars and fantasy nerds alike. London Telegraph. Tolkien buffs, and they are legion, may ensure its survival, but I have a hunch that most will find the show far from Hobbit-forming and emerge as bored of the Rings as I was. The Megamusical is an emotionally hollow behemoth intently focused on ticking off its storyboard checklist. It hurtles through 1,000 pages of plot soup without pausing to investigate the heart of the beloved tale or its multi-species characters. All it needs is a more engaging storytelling approach, an emotional arc, credible performances, and a coherent musical score. In other words, what's missing is the essence of theater itself. Woof. J. Kelly Nestruck for the Boston Globe. But the specter of kitschy, can-canning hobbits that many J.R.R. Tolkien and musical theater fans feared has not materialized. The show's international creative team has created a stage epic that is surprisingly smart and visually stunning, and does not feature Frodo singing about a few of his favorite rings. There's a strange repeating motif in a lot of these reviews about fears of what kind of musical this could have been, and relief that it was not that. It's strange because while musical theater can be, in 2006 and now, quite cheesy, The style of musicals of the 2000s is much more the pop musical, like a Wicked or a Spring Awakening, or Legally Blonde, or even your pop music meets classical music of the 80s and 90s, like Les Mis or Phantom. So the fear of kitschy can-canning hobbits feels weirdly misplaced. When the show closed 5 months after its premiere in Toronto, despite an expected years-long run, Kevin Wallace did place some blame on critics. This is from the City News report on the show's imminent closure. Producer Kevin Wallace, in confirming the production will only play for 9 more weeks here before moving to London's Drury Lane Theatre for a May 2007 opening, wouldn't say why the Toronto show was closing. However, he conceded the negative reviews wouldn't have encouraged Torontonians to go. There is no doubt that we have struggled with the mixed message that went out on the evening of the 23rd and the morning of the 24th, Wallace said at the Princess of Wales Theatre, which is such strange wording to use, to call reviews a message or messaging. While reviews are often used in marketing, reviews are not marketing. Reviews as a collective are not meant to be a cohesive message. And also, Kevin, what would you have a critic do if they come to the Lord of the Rings musical and don't like it? Write a positive review anyway for the good of the local tourist economy? Kevin Wallace also apparently said, if the critics think they don't have power, believe me, they do. He's also said in a few different interviews that he believes audiences in Toronto generally liked the show. There's a weird paradox in how we talk about critics. They are both incredibly powerful, able to sway audiences with nothing more than their star ratings and a pithy pull quote. On the other hand, critics are so out of touch with the common man. I mean, they can't be both. So the show closes in Toronto and the team starts the process of moving to London and cuts 30 minutes off the show's runtime. Wallace clearly expected it to do well in London. In fact, he said at the Toronto press conference when the show was closing, frankly, I believe that if the same critics had seen it at the National Theatre in London, they would have embraced it. Its spiritual home is in the London Theatre. At this point, Mr. Wallace has already been hit in the face with a pie, is standing up, wiping the whipped cream off of himself, and clearly stating to the world that no other pie will hit him, only to get hit immediately by a new, more British pie. The show opened in the spring of 2007 in London to mixed reviews. It did manage to run for about a year before closing, which isn't bad, but the show reportedly lost £12 million, was not able to repay its investors, and is frequently listed among the West End's biggest flops. There was rumored to be a world tour that was going to begin in 2015, but that never materialized. I think sometimes when you're repeatedly told that you're gonna like something, everyone's gonna like something, it's gonna be so huge and successful, and then you don't like it quite as much as you thought you would, it's the person in power getting a pie in the face. It's a longer fall from dignity because the buildup was so high. I mean, there's a reason that no one calls a little theater production from an entirely new company that has poor ticket sales a flop. It started out as an underdog and continued to be an underdog. So what can we take away from this? I had a different conclusion for this video recorded, but I thought of this while I was editing. No flop is as clear-cut as you think it is. Public memory tends to label things as successes, flops, and most that fall in between are forgotten. Sure, the Lord of the Rings musical team came out of that first press release with a bit of hubris, a bit too sure of their own success, and sure, it underperformed and received mixed reactions. But it's far from the everyone hated this mess I was expecting to find. I read several reviews of critics who liked it. I talked to people who saw it and liked it. It was nominated for a bunch of Dora Awards and Olivier Awards. So I guess my conclusion is, the public memory of something is not the whole story. Read further. It hurtles through 1,000 pages of plot soup without pausing to investigate the heart of the beloved tale or its multi-species characters. I mean,